What's up guys, Joey here at schoolofmotion.com and welcome to day 8 of 30 days of After Effects. I'm going to run out of fingers pretty soon. Real quick, let me give a shout out to the Department of Motion Design at the Ringling College of Art and Design for being a sponsor of 30 days of After Effects, which is something I never imagined would happen. Ringling, they don't just focus on making you a good motion designer, they also focus on making you an employable motion designer and ready to be a professional and work in the industry. And one of the things that I always find is that there's kind of this battle going on in your brain as a motion designer. You want to make everything you touch the most amazing thing you've ever done. At the same time, you have sometimes small budgets and short schedules, and sometimes you just got to get stuff done. And in those situations, you got to reach into your bag of tricks and pull out something that you can execute very quickly, that you know how to do, and it won't take you a long time. What I'm going to show you today is one of those tricks, and I didn't even come up with this one. My good friend Kyle Predki, an animator at Toil, he sort of came up with this move, I guess you want to call it, and I saw him do it over and over again on different projects. This was sort of just his go-to move whenever he needed to animate something and he didn't have time to think about it. He would just do this and it looks great, and I stole it from him, which I think that's okay because I'm giving him credit, and I'm going to link to his website. So this move is called the Predki, and I'm going to show you how to pull it off. I'm going to show you how to make it efficient. What I'm hoping it does is give you guys some ideas about some things you can do that can then go into your bag of tricks. You can pull them out whenever you need. So let's hop into After Effects and get started. So like I said, this is just going to be a tutorial to show you guys one trick. And I'm not usually a huge fan of tutorials that just sort of show you one trick, but this is actually a little different. When you're animating stuff and you're flying and you got to get stuff done, sometimes you just gotta pull one of your tricks out of your bag of tricks. Now this trick, I call it the Predki, and it's named after a good friend of mine, Kyle Predki, who was an animator at Toil, and I saw him do something like this on a few projects, and I really like the way it looks, and so I sort of stole it. A wise man once said that the best artists steal. So I stole this from Kyle, but I am giving him credit, so hopefully that's okay. So what I'm going to show you is, first of all, how you can get this kind of bouncy, cool, kooky animation. And then I'll show you, of course, a way to customize it and kind of make it your own and really make it flexible. All right, so let's start out with a new comp. And let's just make this, your standard 1920, 1080. And I'm just gonna make a star. We'll just do something really simple here, just to show you the concept of this. One of the most common things you're gonna do in motion design is have something, have like a background or an empty screen and reveal something, right? Type or a logo or whatever it is. And there's, an infinite number of ways to do that. Some of my favorite ways are just by using good animation and making things move in an interesting way. So to use the Predki, if we go back and we just kind of look at this, kind of in slow motion here, you can see that there's rotation happening. There's, these letters are scaling up, each of them from 0, and it's almost like they're on a spring, kind of, swinging back and forth like this. All right. So the way I set this up is I first move the anchor point. Okay, so I'm gonna hit Y, and Y lets me click the anchor point and move it around, and I'm gonna move it so it's down and off to the side a little bit. Okay, and the reason I do that is because now when I rotate that layer, it kind of rotates like it's on a spring. All right, and the idea is I want to have this thing start scaled down and maybe here, and then as it scales up, I want it to swing back and then kind of land. Okay, so let's start by having this shape be here. Let's put a keyframe, and then I'm also going to put a scale keyframe, so Option S. And the first thing I do, when I sort of block these things out, is I just try to figure out how long I want that animation to take, right? And so what I'm doing is I'm trying to picture it in my head, and I'm sort of trying to figure out how many frames it's going to take. So it's going to kind of bounce out, about like that. And I'm thinking, that's maybe 1.5 seconds. Okay, so I'm going to jump forward to 1.5 seconds, and I'm going to put the final keyframes there. So the final keyframes are going to be this. Then I'll go back in and I'll fill in any other keyframes I need, knowing that this is where I want it to end up, okay? And sometimes I'll work backwards and sometimes I'll work forwards. If I was gonna work backwards for this, well, the first thing I'm gonna do is I'm gonna set the scale to 0 here, okay? Because we know it's gonna start at 0 and it's gonna end there, okay? But before it gets there, I want it to first way overshoot over here, okay? So why don't we go to the middle of this and let's have it rotate way past where it's supposed to go, okay? And at the same time, I'm gonna have it scale up way past where it's supposed to go. Okay, so maybe try and give ourselves some easy numbers here. Why don't we say 130 on scale? Okay, so now it goes back and then this way, okay? Now I also want it to kind of feel springy, so it's gonna overshoot this way, but then it's gonna start to come back and it's gonna overshoot the other way. All right, so let's go forward a few frames here. Maybe 6 frames. And an easy trick is I can just copy these keyframes like this and then overshoot them a little bit, okay? And now because it overshot on scale, it got too big, on the next frame it's gonna be too small, okay? So let's try 85. Now, when you're doing this, you know, it's kind of hard to just look at keyframes and kind of see what your animation's doing, which is why I am a humongous fan of the animation curve editor. This makes it so much easier to do stuff like this. And you know, I tell people, and I would tell people at Toil and students at Ringling, get in that curve editor because you can actually see what your animation's doing. And you know, I might talk about this in a later video, but what's happening with this type of animation is it's sort of like a modified pendulum animation, right? You've got you know, a value that's oscillating, which means it's going back and forth between a low value and a high value. And the difference between this and a real kind of pendulum animation is that the keyframes are going to get closer and closer together, like it's on a spring. So it starts here, overshoots, overcorrects, all right? And now what I can do, I can hold Command and I can click right on that curve, and then I can just pull this up a little bit, right? And then maybe come forward a little bit here and overcorrect a little bit this way. And so visually you can really see what's going on, and it makes it so much easier to get the curve smooth. You know, I can see here, you wouldn't be able to see this if I was just looking at the keyframes. Let me make sure, if you ever click on the curve editor button and you don't see your curves, make sure you select the property you want to look at, okay? So we're working on scale here, and if I was just looking at keyframes, I can't see that there's a problem with this keyframe. But if I come into the curve editor and I select that keyframe, look, I can see that this Bezier handle is not flat. And what that means is the rotation, or the scale property, it never settles, it never stops changing. Sometimes that's what you want, but if you're doing like a pendulum animation, when this thing swings this way, it's going to stop for a second, and it's going to come back this way, and it's going to stop for a second, it's going to come back. All right, so if that ever happens, then what I do is I grab, you know, if this was messed up, I would just hit F9 to ease it. That'll kind of reset it, and then I can just adjust the handles, okay? And, you know, this is where I really like to, you know, get in there and think about exactly the speed that I want this thing to have, right? Do I want the rotation to, you know, what's happening now is it starts not rotating at all, and then it slowly picks up speed, and then it slows down again. Now, I know I want it to slow down again, and I probably want that to be more extreme. But do I want the star to, you know, shoot out right out of the gate, or do I want it to slowly ramp up into that rotation? And, you know, there's not really a right answer. It's not like we're trying to mimic some real world thing. So why don't we try this, okay? And you can see now our scale has this nice kind of oscillating curve, and then our rotation doesn't yet, okay? What I'm gonna do is I am going to click this button here right next to scale, okay? And what that little button does is it's just gonna keep this curve on screen even when I'm looking at my rotation curve, okay? And this is just a nice way so I can kind of keep them in sync with each other. All right, so I know I'm gonna need a keyframe there, and again, I'm just holding Command on a Mac. On a PC, it's probably Control or Alt, one of the two. And I'm just making sure that I have keyframes for rotation everywhere I put a keyframe for scale. And I just want them to be in sync, right? So I'm just going to sort of eyeball this for now. I'm going to zoom in a little bit. Okay, and then I'm going to select all my rotation keyframes. And a quick way to do that, if you're in the curve editor and you click rotation, it will show you your curve. If you click it again, it will select every keyframe. So then I can hit F9. This big box that you see that it put around my my curve, this lets you scale the curve, and this is actually very useful. But right now I don't actually want to see that box, so I'm going to click this icon right here, and you'll see the little help thing pops up, show transform box when multiple keys are selected. I'm going to turn that off for now. Okay, because it's just going to get in the way. And then I'm going to go through and I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to pull my curves out so that I get a more extreme kind of acceleration and deceleration. And it's not going to be perfectly symmetrical or identical to the scale curve, but that's okay because those little inconsistencies in the speed can kind of give it a little more life. All right, so let's take a look at this now. I just kind of made all these keyframes without actually previewing the animation. Okay, so now if we look at this, it's kind of neat, right? And I mean, that's a Predki right there, okay? Now one thing I need to make sure is that the rotation actually ends at 0, which it doesn't right now, so let me fix that, okay? And when I play this, I mean, there's nothing wrong with it. It actually works pretty well. That first, kind of move right there where it whips back, it feels a little fast, okay? So what I'm going to do is and just to sort of show you where that's happening, if you look at the curve, see right there, you see how steep that curve is? Right there, that's why it's moving so fast. So if I want that to be not so fast, I can make this not as steep. So if I push this back this way, that will help. Or if I push this back this way, and I might just kind of nudge both of these handles, and let's see, that feels better. Okay, so now it's not as jarring of a move. Cool? This type of stuff, it always looks great when you put motion blur on it too. Cool? All right, so let's say we like that. And there is one Predki. There's a single Predki move right there, okay? And so if I had 5 different stars, I would just do something like this on each one. The trick I did for this type here is I actually had each little piece, this quotation mark, this one, the P, the R, the E, I had them all move, kind of opposite. So the P would sort of come out from here. It would go kind of counterclockwise, but then the R would animate on clockwise. And I would sort of, offset the timing of them and all that kind of stuff and move the anchor point around a little bit. Because the cool thing about an animation like this is that it's all based on where the anchor point is, right? So just by moving the anchor point up here, now we get a totally different looking animation, right? And it's even, I had the anchor point on the left side, but if we put it on the right side, right, then it kind of does a different move. And so you can really easily get variations just by moving the anchor point. I mean, and it's, the anchor point's pretty far off of the object. If I put it just on one corner of it, right, then you get something a little more subtle. I mean, it's still kind of bouncy and goofy, but it's a little bit more subtle. Cool. So that's essentially it. I mean, if you look at, this is animation 101 here. You've got, a kind of sine wave looking move here, and it's oscillating between 2 extremes. And there's some rules that you kind of need to follow to make these, to really make these work well. And that's kind of, that's kind of an animation class maybe to come in the future. But in general, if you can get a nice smooth looking curve like this, your animation's gonna feel pretty good. And the key is, again, to understand what you're looking at here. And an easy way to remember it is the steeper the curve, the faster it's moving. By the way, if you're looking at your curve and it doesn't look like this, click this button here. It looks like a little menu kind of thing. Make sure you're looking at the value graph, okay? If you haven't watched Intro to Animation Curves, that would be a great one to watch. But if it looks like this is the speed graph. And I don't like this graph. Every once in a while, you're forced to use it. But this does not really make any sense to me. Okay, looking at this, I have no idea what my object is doing. But when I look at the value graph, that's when you can really see what the animation's doing. Okay, so now let's talk about how we can make this a little bit easier to manage and to customize, okay? So let's hop in to this comp here. This was I just made a Photoshop file with these letters in it, and I made them really goofy looking because this animation is pretty goofy. So you wanna match your animation style to your art direction. All right, so if you're animating something that looks like really techy and robotic, then the Predki is not something you're going to want to use. It just doesn't fit the character of the style. But for really fun, bouncy, cartoony, goofy stuff, it works perfectly. So all I've done here is I have each letter, right, is kind of on its own layer, and this is going to make it really easy for us to apply a little Predki move to each one. My buddy Kyle's he's gonna be tickled. He's gonna hear his name so many times in this video. All right, so let's start with the P. All right, so I'm just gonna solo everything. I'm gonna solo all the letters in the background. All right, so let's start with this P. So now, the way I just did the Predki on that star was by selecting the layer, hitting Y, moving the anchor point over here, and that's great, but the problem is if I have to do this for every single letter, and some I want to go clockwise and some I want to go counterclockwise, it can get kind of annoying to have to constantly set things up, copy and paste curves, but then adjust them. And also, if you have any keyframes on your position of these layers and you move the anchor point, it's going to throw off your position keyframes. So I actually figured out a different way to do this that it makes it a little bit easier to customize. Here's what we're gonna do. We're going to use an effect to actually do the Predki. All right, so the effect is in the distort menu, and it's transform. Transform effect, it pretty much just gives you another set of controls for position, scale, rotation, right? And it just duplicates the functionality of your normal position, scale, rotation. What's cool about it though is that it's an effect, and so on top of whatever you keyframe here, you can still rotate and scale and position the layer as you normally would, but it won't mess this up, okay? So first thing I want to do is move the anchor point of this layer, right? So there's an anchor point position here, anchor point property. And one thing that kind of stinks about this effect is when you move the anchor point, you see what happens to the letter, right? It moves in relation to the anchor point. And so then you'd have to go back and move the position as well to get it back where it was supposed to be. That's kind of a pain. So what I do is I do a really, 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 really simple expression. What I want is the position to match the anchor point, okay? So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna hold Option and I'm gonna click the stopwatch next to position, and I'm just gonna pick whip to anchor point and hit enter. Now, when I move the anchor point, it automatically adjusts the position so it matches the anchor point, and so the effect is the letter doesn't move, okay? So now I can put the anchor point wherever I want. I can just click and drag it and move it here, like that, okay? Greatness. So now what I want to do is animate the Predki. Okay, so why don't we put a keyframe, and actually let me see if I can just copy and paste this. All right, so this this scale value here, right? Let's see if I can copy and paste this, because that would be pretty slick. This transform effect, the scale property only has one number.
And unfortunately, the scale property here has two. It has an X and a Y. And so it would actually, wouldn't, you can't just copy and paste it, right? Like if I select the scale keyframes and I copy, and I come over here and I put a keyframe on the scale property on my transform effect. Let's hit U so we can see it. If I try to paste it, it won't work because you can't paste from 3 dimensions to 1 because scale is a 2 or 3 dimensional property. And on this effect, it's not. So what I can do is open up the actual scale for this layer and hit paste. And then I could just, really quickly go through like this, right? I can look at the value here, it's 1.5. And then I can go forward, it's 130. And I'm just basically typing in the value that I pasted in from the star. Right? So that way I don't have to kind of totally rebuild this thing. All right, and now let me turn off the actual scale property. Let's easy ease these. Hop into the curve editor, and we'll do our same kind of adjustment here. So we get really, some more extreme moves, more extreme eases, which kind of makes it feel a little bit springier and bouncier. Okay, cool. So that's the scale, and then we need to do the rotation as well. And rotation, if I copy that, I believe if I put a keyframe on rotation, I believe I can paste those values. So let's try that. Paste. Yep, that worked. And the reason the rotation values could paste is because there's only one value for rotation. There's not two, okay? So now if we look at that, there's our Predki, right? On the P. Wonderful. Okay, let's just preview that a few times. All right, now it feels a little slow to me now for some reason. So what I might do is just take this and compress. Sorry, I'm gonna select all of these keyframes. And I'm gonna hold Option. And if you don't know this trick, this is very useful. If you hold Option and you have to select one of the most extreme keyframes, so either this keyframe or one of these, and you can actually scale the keyframes. So we could say, okay, now it's only gonna take a second. And maybe these are actually gonna move a little closer together. There we go. All right, so now it's a lot bouncier, okay? And it feels a little weird at the end here now for some reason. It feels like it overshoots this way very nicely, but then it kind of doesn't overshoot back far enough maybe here. So I'm just gonna adjust that keyframe a little bit. Let's see what that looks like. All right, and then, I'm starting to nitpick here. I always do this. The curve it just doesn't feel quite right to me. And so I'm just gonna sort of try, what I'm trying to get is a little bit more of a gradual kind of finish to it. Because, I had a, keyframe way up here, but I want it to feel like it's getting closer and closer to this value every single time it oscillates. All right, that's better. Still a little bit extreme. When it comes back here, I think it may be going too far. And then definitely when it goes here, it needs to be a little bit closer. Okay. Guys, I literally could sit here and do this for like 15, 20 minutes, but I won't. Okay, so let's say we're happy with that. That's great. Now, this Predki is a counterclockwise move. So the P starts going counterclockwise, okay? So to make this easier to remember, I'm gonna actually name this CCW, counterclockwise, okay? Now let's say that I wanted the next letter to go clockwise, and then I wanted the E to go counterclockwise, and then the D to go clockwise. I could have a different, I could basically copy and paste this effect, put it on the R, and then adjust the values, and then copy and paste it, put it on the E, and keep the values. But when you're adjusting animations, I like to always make it as easy as possible. Especially Predki is a short word, but what if you had to do this to like 30 layers, right? And you wanted to easily be able to tweak which layers are clockwise, which ones are counterclockwise, and all that kind of stuff. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna just duplicate this counterclockwise transform effect, and I'm going to turn off the original one. So the copy I'm now going to call clockwise, okay? And all I want to do on this one, so let me hit U, all right? And I only want to adjust this clockwise one. The only difference is I want the rotation to basically be backwards from what it is now. So right now it starts at 45 degrees. I want it to start at negative 45 degrees. And then when it's here at negative 76.7, I want it to be at 76.7. So I just want to reverse this, okay? But I want it to end up at 0, same as it does currently. So you could manually do this, but this is where, if I select all these keyframes, this is where this box comes in really handy, the transform box. Because this transform box, it lets you scale, and if you hold, is it command or option? Command. If you hold command and you drag, it lets you do things like this, right? And you can symmetrically change the curve. So what I want to do is I want to make sure that this point, the 0 point, stays at 0. So this is very cool. There's an anchor point to this transform box, and you can just click it and move it over here, okay? So now if I hold command and click and drag, it's going to transform with this as the anchor point. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to come over here, and I'm going to look at this value. It is starting at 27.7, okay? So what I need to make sure is I need to make sure that when I'm done transforming this, this is negative 27.7. So I'm going to hold command, and I'm going to pull this down until that value is negative 27.7. And let's take a look at that, okay? Now, I think that actually I may have done that wrong. Let me think about this one more time. Because this is not the most extreme key. This is here, right? This is negative 76.7. So actually, I think I'm gonna do that one more time, except now I'm gonna keep my playhead here. So let me move that anchor point here, hold command, and make that 76.7. Or as close as I can get. It doesn't have to be exact. And then just make sure that that last keyframe is actually on 0. Okay. And then it looks like I screwed up some of this stuff. So I'm just going to grab these and move them. There we go. And then let's check that out. Cool. So that is the clockwise one. Okay. It starts here at negative 58.2. And it goes this way. Now, it looks a little strange, and it looks like it's going really extreme. Part of that is because the anchor point, if I move this anchor point over here, for example, oh, and you can see another problem we're having here. This position on this clockwise effect, it's actually not linked to this anchor point. It's linked to the original anchor point. So what I need to do is, let me turn off this keyframe for a minute. And then, so I'm going to hold option, I'm going to click position, and I'm just going to make sure, let me open this up, I'm going to make sure that this position expression is actually pick whipped to the correct anchor point. Okay. All right, so now when I adjust this anchor point, it should work out fine. And so now, when we have a clockwise movement, it helps if the anchor point's a little bit to the right of the object. All right, so now if I do that, it works a little bit better. And I think I am going to tweak this a little bit because that does feel like it's going a little bit too far, and maybe just have it start a little bit further out. Cool. All right, so there's your clockwise Predki. And then what's great is we can turn that off and just turn this back on and have a counterclockwise Predki. So what you can do is you can copy both of these effects to every letter and then just turn on the move that you like. So that's a really cool way to kind of give yourself options with different moves, and then just turn this on, turn it off, turn this one on, turn it off. All right, so now there's one other thing that we need to do to make this really, really easy to adjust. Because when I copy this to every letter, I'm going to have to adjust the anchor point on every letter. And it's kind of a pain if every time I want to adjust an anchor point, I have to come in here, open this effect, and adjust the anchor point. So what would be great is if I just had a quick and easy control to set the anchor point of each object. All right, so what I'm going to do is I'm gonna grab the handy dandy expression control effect called a point control. All right, and I'm gonna move this up to the top, and I'm just gonna call this anchor point. Cool. So what I'm gonna do is I'm just gonna use this effect to set the anchor point for the layer, and then I'm gonna set both of these, the counterclockwise and the clockwise effect, to grab the anchor point value from this. And that way, all I have to do is set the anchor point and then turn on the effect that I want, and that's it. Really simple. So let's set that up real quick. So I need to open the counterclockwise effect. I'm gonna hold Option and click anchor point, okay? And then for the expression, I'm gonna grab the pick whip. I'm gonna go all the way up and grab this, okay? Then I'm gonna come to the clockwise effect and do the same thing. Hold Option, click anchor point, and pick whip to this. And there you go. Okay, close this stuff down. So now, if I select the anchor point effect, I can move this point to wherever I want the anchor point, and it will update both of these effects, and then I just turn on counterclockwise, and there you go. Okay, so this is gonna be great. So I'm gonna, let me turn this effect off for a minute, and let me copy and paste all of these effects. So grab them all, Command C, and I'm gonna copy them to these letters, Command V. So now every letter has that same setup. So let's go to the R, select anchor point, and let's move that, okay? Now, let's start actually turning on the animations for each of these. So for the P, I'm gonna do counterclockwise. For the R, I'm gonna do clockwise, okay? And the anchor point is gonna be off to the right. Now, I did screw one thing up. I kinda like letting you guys see these screw ups because, you know, I screw up all the time, and it's good to know how to kind of troubleshoot stuff. When I hit paste to paste those effects, it also pasted the keyframes, and it pasted them where my playhead was. So I actually need to move those back to the beginning. So I'm gonna hit the tilde key over my timeline just to maximize it, grab them all, and then scoot them back to the beginning. Okay, there we go. Greatness. Okay. Another hotkey I just did. If I have all of these layers open and I want to close them, I can hold Shift and hit the tilde key, and that actually closes the layers up for you. It's kind of cool. All right, so we've got the P with a counterclockwise Predki, the R with the clockwise Predki. So now I'm just going to alternate. So the E is going to be counterclockwise, the D is going to be clockwise, the K will be counterclockwise, the I will be clockwise, and then I just need to set anchor points for all these. So the E will be on the left side. The D will be on the right side. The K will be on the left side. And the I will be on the right side. And that's it, okay? So you saw how quick that was, and if I play these now, they all kind of bounce up at the same time. And so now all I gotta do is offset them, right? So let's say there's 2-frame offset between each of them. So I'm gonna select R, and I'm gonna nudge it 2 frames forward. Okay. Then I'm gonna do the E 4 frames forward. And I do this with the keyboard. I just find it's faster. If you guys, don't know all the keyboard shortcuts, the ones I'm using now, these are some of the most amazing time savers. I want to go from this layer and select the one below it. That's Command down arrow. Then I want to nudge this one forward 6 frames. That's Option page down 6 times. So hold Option, hit page down 6 times. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. That quick. Okay? And then this one, I want to move forward 10 frames. So that's Option Shift page down. So once you get the hang of that, you kind of develop some muscle memory, you can do this stuff so quick. Okay? And let's set this preview. Set the out point there. Let's turn on motion blur. Oh, and then this is another interesting thing I'll teach you guys about if you don't know. I turned motion blur on because motion blur is great when you have really bouncy, funny moves like this. It just kind of makes it feel a little more fluid. But there's some weird stuff going on with this motion blur. The reason for that is because I made this in Photoshop, and I used some layer styles to get this kind of fake 3D balloony look. And the problem with doing that is that motion blur gets really screwy when you do that. So I actually used this kind of hacky workaround that worked pretty well. I was actually kind of surprised that it did work. I'm going to add an adjustment layer. We'll just call this motion blur. If I can type correctly, there we go, motion blur. And I'm going to use an effect on that layer in the time group. It's called CC Force Motion Blur. And what this basically does, it just forces After Effects to render subframes. So in between frame 1 and 2, it's going to render however many frames is in here, and it's going to kind of composite them together pretty much the same way After Effects does motion blur. And so when you do this, you can actually get motion blur on your comp, even when you have layer styles and things that normally don't support motion blur. It's a slower render, okay? So it doesn't render quite as fast as the native motion blur, but for stuff like this, it's fine, and it's a good workaround. So there's the Predki, and the key I want you to take away from this is A, it's good to start developing a bag of tricks, okay? And if you don't have your own bag of tricks, or if you've been using the same 3 tricks for a bunch of years, just look across at your buddy Kyle and see what he's doing, and and use it, right? It's like, it's cool. We're motion designers. We like to share our tricks, and change it, modify it, make it your own. But just sometimes someone else's brain works differently, and I don't know if I ever would have come up with this kind of motion, but he just sort of, that kind of stuff is what he's great at, and what he likes to do. And so he showed me this, I've shown him other tricks, and it's great. Now we both have kind of a go-to thing. If we're animating something that's kind of fun and bouncy, we have a trick. The other thing I want you to take away is, even with a simple thing like this, just a simple animation, you can always take a little bit of time up front and set it up so that you can save yourself hours down the road. If I had to do this for like 20 titles, each title maybe has 24 letters in it, right? Then hand animating each letter is clearly out of the question, but even copying and pasting and trying to just modify things on the fly can take a lot of time. If you set up a simple little rig like this, you saw how quickly, once it was set up, it took me like less than probably 30 seconds to apply the motion to every letter. So I seem to use expressions a lot. I have a feeling there's going to be a lot of expressions in this 30 days of After Effects, but hopefully these are simple expressions, and they're just kind of going to get you used to it. And then later on, we'll do some deep diving. We'll really get into expressions. So I hope everybody learned something, and thank you as always. If this was useful, please share this on Facebook, Twitter, email your friends, tell people about this, because the more this knowledge spreads, the better off the motion design community is going to be, and the easier it's going to be for me to be able to keep making content like this. So thank you guys so much. I really appreciate it, and stay tuned for the next episode of 30 Days of After Effects.
Thank you guys so much for watching. Thank you, Kyle Predki, for coming up with this move, or stealing it and then letting me steal it and teach the entire internet how to do it. And hopefully you guys, you learned some things about animation principles and how to make things feel kind of bouncy and have interesting character to them. And hopefully now you'll start developing your own little tricks. And if you do develop them and you feel like sharing, post them on this page, post them in the comment section, and maybe together we can build up this huge bag of tricks, and it'll be easier for everyone to kind of get their work done quicker. I also want to thank the Department of Motion Design at the Ringling College of Art and Design one more time. And if you haven't checked out the contest they're sponsoring, you should definitely check that out, because it's an amazing opportunity to get your work in front of Ringling faculty. So thank you guys so much. If you like this tutorial, please share it, please email me, please leave comments, and I will see you next time.